The race to become Florida's next governor includes more than a dozen candidates. Joining us today, the leading candidate on the Republican side, former Congressman and Florida's current Agriculture Commissioner, Adam Putnam. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming. Latest polling was just released on Tuesday by Mason-Dixon. Shows that you have a 4-point lead on Representative DeSantis, but more than 40% of Republicans still undecided. Where do you see the biggest differences between the two of you?
Yeah, being number one right now is like being number one in the preseason. It feels good, but it's not worth a hoot. But I love where we stand in terms of the grassroots. When I announced in my hometown of Bartow, there were over 2,000 people there, and they weren't even all kinfolks. When we had an event 2 weeks ago in Citrus County, it was 34 degrees, and we had 550 people there. So all across the state, North Florida, South Florida, the coast interior, we're seeing this momentum building because I believe that they share my vision for a stronger, better Florida.
But specifically against Representative DeSantis, how would you differentiate between the two of you?
Well, he's very Washington focused, and the issues facing Florida are critically important to our state, and Washington's not going to fix our problems. My number one priority is putting vocational and technical education back into our middle schools, our high schools, and supporting our state colleges where we're going to rebuild the middle class. We're going to bring higher paying jobs to Florida. Washington can't solve that problem. In fact, we've seen examples where, he just on issues important to Floridians just doesn't understand what they're facing.
Okay. Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum, also a Democratic candidate for governor, called you racist in a Twitter argument that you guys got a little dust up back in December, if I remember. It was about sanctuary cities. In 2003, as a congressman, you'd sponsored a bill that offered a path to permanent residency for illegal immigrants who had worked here for 3 years, not citizenship. Set the record straight. How would you describe your immigration policy?
Well, first of all, we have to secure our borders. We have to reform the legal immigration system, and I don't think that Florida ought to have sanctuary cities. I believe that puts me squarely in the camp of the vast majority of Floridians. We can't have two sets of laws. We do need to have a modern immigration system, and we have to be able to secure our borders. What we saw with the Indianapolis Colts linebacker, where he was killed by someone driving with triple the legal limit of alcohol in their bloodstream, who had been deported twice, but found his way back in and took the lives of 2 Americans. That is precisely the type of reason why sanctuary cities should not be here in Florida.
What about the wall? Do you believe in the wall?
I think the wall is a very important part of border security, as are highly trained and sufficient numbers of Border Patrol agents and technology. I mean, look, if we can read a license plate in the mountains of Afghanistan from space, we ought to be able to better use technology on our borders. So it includes walls, sensors, fences, old-fashioned Border Patrol agents.
On DACA, do you believe that there should be a path to either permanent residency or citizenship for the nearly 1 million Dreamers who came here as children?
Boy, when you look at the Dreamers, and there's tens of thousands here in Florida, they were brought here by the decision of their parents, not themselves. And I think that what President Trump has laid out is a balanced approach. Border security, getting rid of the visa lottery system, reforming chain migration, and offering that long-term solution for those Dreamers so that we can solve it once and for all instead of having yet another wave that has to be dealt with in 2 years.
Okay. Taxpayer incentives. Do you favor taxpayer incentives for businesses, and how would you get businesses to come here or stay here without them?
Look, I'm a small businessman and a farmer. They don't offer any incentives to farmers to go plant a new orange grove or buy a new herd of cattle. However, when we have game-changing opportunities to bring new industries to Florida, we ought to roll up our sleeves and compete. It ought to be transparent. We ought to be accountable to the taxpayers for how we do that. But when you look at the rocket launch this week, the heavy payload coming out of Florida, let's build on that industry. When you look at our panhandle communities who have above the state average of unemployment but are competing every day with Georgia and Alabama, just a stone's throw away, I think we ought to be willing to engage in the economic development fights in an open, transparent way and be willing to sell Florida, visit Florida, tourism, the 100 million visitors who come here each year and spend their money and then go back home.
There are public financing, public funds available to candidates for certain offices. You took some heat in the last election for accepting those, about $460,000, if I remember correctly, for the current Agriculture Commission position. Do you plan to accept that money again?
Well, we haven't made that decision about how we will run our campaign from the tactical standpoint of that, but the reason why Florida that provision is to prevent people from buying an election and you not being able to compete. I'm very proud of the fact that we have 8,000 donors who have contributed to my campaign. It's part of that Florida First agenda. It's part of that grassroots momentum that we're building, one barbecue, one house party, one event at a time, and I think that's why you're seeing the success that we've had so far.
Okay. Decision to be made later, I understand. On federal agencies, we've seen the FBI and the Department of Justice taking a lot of heat from President Trump and from some Republicans over this application for surveillance on Carter Page and the Trump campaign. Do you feel like it was inappropriate? What is your stance on the Nunes memo?
Look, I'm glad that the Nunes memo was released. Going back to my earlier answer, I think transparency is always important in public life. But make no mistake, I stand behind our men and women in law enforcement also. Our local sheriffs, our police officers, our first responders and fire service. It's important that they know that we have their backs when they're running into situations everyone else is running away from. So when there are abuses, they need to be investigated. But as governor, I will put our veterans, our military, and our first responders first.
All right. Commissioner Adam Putnam, candidate for governor on the Republican side, we really appreciate you joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.